With the corpse of Codemasters' rally team still warm, WRC has run straight back into the arms of their ex, Kiloton, with the next WRC game scheduled for 2027. I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, it's better than nothing, and off the top of my head, I honestly don't know of any other alive and kicking developer that has a recent history with rally games. On the other hand, I've never been all that enthusiastic about the KT rally games that I've played, namely WRC 7, 9, and Generations. I don't hate them, but they were always merely a decent complement to the Codemasters games for me. They did have their strong points, namely the stages that were very much the saving grace of those games, if you ask me, but there was always a constant sense of slight jank and roughness around the edges that never really seemed to go away for me. But all of that subjectivity aside, more KT is what we're getting, and I would rather be optimistic than cynical. I've been thinking a lot about what I want from this new game, so here's my wish list for WRC 27, or whatever it ends up being called. I'll start off listing things that I think are more realistic, and then I'll go over the more optimistic wishes towards the end. And just for clarity, this wishlist will be based on my experience with Generations, since it's their most recent rally title. So, the first thing I want, and that we can safely expect, is an advancement of graphics technology. And I don't just mean make the graphics better, there are some specific things that I want. For starters, it should have native HDR support. I don't know if this is present in the console version or not, but it is absent in the PC version of WRC Generations. I think good HDR is really nice in racing games, especially at night, where things like headlights really shine, pun intended. I also want to see upscaler support for all three GPU vendors. Generations has DLSS support, so by 2027 I would really want the latest versions of FSR and XeSS to be included as well. According to Traction.gg, we might be getting this game on a new engine, though take that with a grain of salt as there was no source provided there. But if we do get a new engine, I'd really love to see it be more performant than the old KT engine, as I found these WRC games to be quite underwhelming with their frame rates given how they look. To my eye, Dirt Rally 2.0 is better looking than WRC Generations, despite being 3 years older and running at higher frame rates on my system. Say what you want about Codemasters, but this is an area where the Ego engine took a big shit on everything else in the rally space, so it would be great if KT managed something similar or at least close the gap a little bit. The next thing I'd like to see is a better cockpit experience. It's mostly okay as it is, but there are a few things to be improved. I've noticed that in certain cars, the heads-up display or shift indicators don't seem to be working in Generations, which is quite poor. I'm not sure if that's a bug or if it was actually shipped unfinished, but I don't want to see that in a new game. Also, cockpit camera adjustment needs a major redesign. In most modern sims, you can either bind buttons to adjust your view, or there'll be a camera adjustment tool that you can access very quickly. In WRC Generations, neither of these are the case, and you have to dive through a bunch of option sub-menus every single time you get in a new car to set up the camera. It gets tiresome quickly. Some streamlining here is desperately needed. A global FOV setting, ideally using degrees of some kind, would be very welcome as well. This next issue is disappointing to even have to address at all, but here we are. The throttle. For those unaware, here's the skinny. WRC Generations has very unusual car behaviour, where the throttle has a massive dead zone where it doesn't seem to make the car go. This gives the cars a very on-off sensation when putting down the power, making it much more difficult to modulate and steer with the throttle through the corners. You can tweak things a little bit in the control settings to reduce that feeling of dead zone, but even then, it's like having a rock in your shoe. You can get used to it, but it's always going to feel bad and you're going to be walking funny the entire time. I don't want to see this nonsense in the next game, and if it is, I won't be buying it. Period. While we're on the subject of inputs, Generations is missing support for multiple bindings of the same input. In my case, I want this specifically because I have a dedicated sequential shifter as well as the wheel's paddles, and depending on what car I'm driving, one will be more authentic than the other. Every single other sim that I play lets me bind both the shifter and the paddles to the same shift up and shift down inputs, so I can use whichever one I want seamlessly. It's very annoying that I can only use one or the other in Generations without third-party software intervention. One oddity of Generations that has been in the KT games for quite a while now is what happens when you cross the finish line. There's something about the way the car stops so quickly that really gets me every time. I think the Codemasters games have had you drive to the steward at the end of the stages since Dirt 4, if I'm not mistaken, and Richard Burns Rally has that too. It's kind of the same problem as the Gran Turismo 7 pitting system, in that you're permitted to just yeet yourself at the finish line with reckless abandon with no consequences. It's not realistic and it slightly lowers the skill ceiling of the game, so it would be nice to have that updated. And we can't whine about a racing simulator without complaining about the physics. To be transparent with you, this isn't an area that I'm actually all that fanatical about. I know that I don't know what I'm talking about since I've never raced a real car. But if I was going to point to something in WRC Generations that I think is off, it's the simulation of weight transfer. For instance, if you watch a replay from a third-person trackside perspective, like you would often see in real rally footage, the cars look strangely stiff and they seem to lean from side to side too quickly. Contrast this with Richard Burns Rally, and immediately it looks so much more lifelike with how the car pitches around and rides over bumps. It's a pretty stark difference, so I think that's an area that KT could improve. I think one of KT's historic weaknesses has been the sound quality, but I think given their position as a developer, it's not surprising. Kiloton seem to inhabit the AA section of the market, so they are naturally a bit more resource constrained, and I think one of the first areas where a AA developer is likely to make sacrifices compared to AAA, it's the sound design. It clearly takes a lot of expertise, talent, and work to deliver reference-grade sound quality, so I'm under no illusion that this would be easy for KT to improve. But if they did, I think it would be so worth it. The sound is a huge appeal of motorsport, so getting that right will elevate any racing game to the next level, and I think it's a critical reason for why I've enjoyed Codemasters games so much over the years. Improvements to both the car sound effects and the co-driver voices would be very welcome.
Crest, keep left, into left 5, bumpy, tightens, into flat right, 30, caution, rock in, left 5, tightens, into right 4, short, 50, right 3, keep in, 30.
Set right, and 6 left, opens long over bumps, 50, fine right of a crest, early fine left, 70, crest and unseen, open hairpin left.
This next wish also ties into the AA developer aspect, and it might sound strange, but hear me out. I want less cars. Yes, that's right, I want less for my money, because less is more. Well, less is more on the condition that the quality rises as the quantity drops. I think for KT to develop a genuinely high-quality product for 2027, it's integral that they don't get carried away with the scope of the game. Now, what I'm about to say is coming from someone who really gravitates towards older cars in rally games because I prefer them, but I would be perfectly happy if they just stuck with the 2027 WRC cars and nothing else. Make them look, sound, and feel phenomenal to drive, and I think you will have a more satisfied and enthusiastic player base than if you delivered a sea of mediocre cars. And with a happy player base established, you can always deliver more cars later via updates and DLC. Setting a firm foundation to start with should be the goal. Now, there's no louder minority in sim racing than the VR and triple screen mobs, who admittedly have had a pretty bad time of things with modern rally games. From what I hear, Richard Burns Rally is supposed to have some of the best implementations for people using these display setups, which is kind of funny given that it is over 20 years old and driven entirely by mods at this stage. I'm currently a single screen guy for now, But I'd like to see these things supported even if they don't directly affect me now. Not only will the rest of us have less whining to put up with, but if I ever jump onto either of these bandwagons, I'll have more titles to enjoy them with. I also think it's a good PR move to get the hardcore sim audience on board with your game early on. But that said, KT and Codemasters have been the only companies making rally games for the past 7 to 8 years, and it was clearly never a priority for either of them. I can only assume that this is because they have the data on how people play their games, and it simply didn't make economic sense for them to do it. And if they did, it was a low priority and it came later on. I wouldn't be holding my breath that anything has changed here, unfortunately. Despite EAWRC evidently being a commercial failure, to this day I think one of its strongest elements was the business model. The amount of rally content delivered in the base game was good for the price, and the move away from yearly installments, even though the game died very prematurely, was appreciated. I think the issue was that the quality of the product was rough out of the gate, and they were unable to fix enough ongoing issues quickly enough to shake that reputation. If KT are able to stick the landing for the launch of the new game, I think it's plausible that they could establish their new game as a platform for the next 3 to 4 years, while supporting the game with updates and DLC. I find that approach and concept much friendlier and less alienating as a player. But given the turbulence of how things went down with Codemasters, I think KT are much more likely to stick with their historic strategy of yearly releases. I'd love to be wrong though. And for my final wish, official mod support would be really cool, particularly if that enabled the fanbase to fix the annoying janky problems that the game is undoubtedly going to have. But we all know that won't happen. Hey guys, Bad Driver from the future here. You might have guessed that I wrote and recorded this video before the Assetto Corsa rally announcement, which I'm obviously pretty stoked about. But it made me think about whether or not ACR being on the horizon changes anything for me with WRC 27. And I think it both does and doesn't. Everything I've talked about here are still things that I want to see from Kiloton's next WRC game. And it's also encouraging to see that ACR has listed some of those things as features on their Steam page. But at the same time, I feel a tad bit less invested in the outcome for the next WRC game now. I still want it to be great, as I believe genuine competition is an objectively good thing for the consumer, but if it does end up disappointing, it won't be as devastating since we don't have all of our proverbial rally eggs in the one basket. I think the most interesting thing about this is going to be how differently these two titles are going to approach the market. Like ACR is very much following in Dirt Rally's footsteps by going down the PC exclusive early access route, presumably with a console release coming later in the future. Whereas I can't imagine the next WRC is going to be anything other than the traditional multi-plat retail release. And presumably they will still have the advantage of exclusive rights to the current WRC cars, but yeah, exciting and optimistic times compared to what we were facing just a few months ago when Codemasters bit the dust. My fingers are crossed for both of these games. Some true next-gen rally sims would be very welcome. Here's hoping. If by some miracle you've made it this far, thanks very much for watching. Do you agree or disagree with my wishlist, or did I miss something? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell if you'd like to see more from me. And if you're interested, feel free to join my Discord community. It's a grower, not a shower. Link is in the description. Until next time, always remember, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, you can't get fooled again. Can you?